you're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking you, does somebody's lies have you questioning your own reality? And I think that many of you might be going through some turmoil right now. Some of you may be experiencing manipulation and gaslighting in your current situations. You might not even realize it. You might have an idea, but you don't realize the full picture because it's hard to see it coming. And I find that the closer we are in relationships, very close friendships, romantic relationships, family dynamics, it can be really challenging to see what's happening. And sometimes things can be presented one way, and it has you questioning what's up and what's down. And I find that many times you might ask yourself many questions, wondering what is the truth or what is happening. And that can really put you in a pattern of questioning not only yourself, questioning your gut, but also it takes you off target. It gets you distracted in life. And so you start focusing on small things, not looking at the big picture. And anybody that's been in a relationship, and it could be with anybody that is not experiencing honesty or truth, it can seem questionable what's happening. And so in today's show, I want to give some guideposts, some guideposts, maybe some red flags as to what to look for, but also more than that, is what you can do to change the situation or try to get some knowledge or try to get the truth out of the situation to better your situation, to be able to see things clearer, or at least in order to get closure. Because that's what we're all looking for, isn't it? We're looking for that honesty, but then there's a point where you're looking to the fact of, okay, you know what? I need to maybe step back from this, or I need to get some more understanding, or I need to get some emotional distance. And all those things are important. And when I talk about emotional distance, and I talk about that pretty often, all I'm saying with that is that we need to get to that point where we can step back and really kind of see the situation clearer than we are right now. And you know, when a friend comes to you and tells you a situation and you're listening to it and you can kind of see the red flags and you can kind of see the problems inherent in the system, and that person doesn't see it that way, why is that? Because they're too close. They can't see it because they're too close. And that's something that I really want us to look at. That's something that I want us to think about today, because that's going to really help us to understand our situation, and it's going to help us put that in perspective, which I think is very, very powerful. So let's start with the first red flag or consideration. And that I think is something that many people experience when they're in a relationship where they begin to question the reality of what's happening. And that is, you ask questions of the other person and they might avoid you. They might laugh at those questions. They might ignore them, or they might generally minimize them. And the latter, to me, is what I see most when you're really dealing with more of a manipulative type person, is that minimization of the question that you asked. And what I mean by that is you ask something and it's very important for you to know, and the person, squawks at it, or, oh, come on, are you serious? And minimizes it, makes it a certain way for you. And then you begin to question the question you asked. Does it have merit? Is this really important for me to know? And that's where the manipulation kind of hits. Is when the person is using your own question and using a tactic to minimize that against you in a way that makes you question, why am I asking this in the first place? So not only are you allowing somebody to manipulate you, you're also questioning your gut and why you wanted to ask that too. And really think about that. If that's happened recently to you, if somebody's avoided completely, changed the subject even, that's a big one too, where somebody changes the subject, gets you all flustered or confused, maybe makes you laugh, maybe makes a joke. Perhaps they turn it on something else. They bring up another topic that's important. Maybe they question something about you. Turn it around, make you defend yourself. There's lots of things that happen here. And it can be hard, especially when it's a good friend, for example, where you get along with this person very well, you laugh, you have a good time. You might be asking a question that's very important to you, and they, on the other hand, decide to make a joke or make a laugh about it. And this is something that I want you to think about it, because when that does happen, it can be an interesting situation. Another thing is that sometimes we're also told that we are overanalyzing a situation. We're told that we're overanalyzing a situation or overthinking a situation. And that's something that I really want you to think about as well. If you're being told that you're overanalyzing something or overthinking it, that situation is something that we really need to look at. And so if that's the case, if somebody's telling you that you need to lighten up, or you need to see, or something to that degree, we also need to step back as well, because what is really happening here? And there's sometimes that we could be off target completely. There's some times in life where honestly we make snap judgments and we shouldn't make snap judgments, or we make judgments and they were really off balance and off base. And definitely nobody's perfect. We can all make mistakes, but a lot of these things carry with them the pieces together. It's not just one thing. It's not just one question that you ask and somebody ignores it or minimizes. It's several different pieces here that we'll be talking about that kind of puts the puzzle together a little bit to understanding a little bit more of what we're dealing with. If somebody's saying, hey, you're too heavy, or you need to lighten up, or you're overanalyzing, that in and of itself could be true, based on that as being the only thing. But if it's coupled with other situations here that we're going to talk about, that could actually, prove to be a situation that we need to be aware of. Another indication, too, is that if you've ever experienced a situation that takes place that doesn't seem to add up, and you begin to question the other things around it. So when something doesn't seem to add up, when there's something off, for example, maybe, somebody drops contact, or somebody doesn't show up for something, it doesn't tell you why, it doesn't even contact you until the following day, all different various situations, all these things don't seem to add up because it's not how that person would normally act. And those are the times that really make us question, because a lot of times we go to the worst, right? We start assuming something bad has happened to somebody. Maybe they were in an auto accident or hurt or in the hospital or something to that ramification. And then that's not always not possible. Sometimes that happens. But for the most part, normally those situations did not take place to that degree. And we are actually assuming that or thinking that the worst situation, because there's no way that this person wouldn't do X, Y, Z. There's no way that this person wouldn't follow through with this. And so what happens in situations where we start questioning ourselves is when things start shifting. And some of those situations that take place, that their response or their non-response or their ghosting or whatever that looks like. And ghosting is a very big deal. I've talked about ghosting in some of my videos on YouTube. I have another video on YouTube coming out on ghosting and how to offset it. But if you've been ghosted by somebody, even for a day or two, that can be really unsettling. And I know that some of you out there have experienced that recently. Maybe you're dating somebody, been dating somebody for a few months, everything's been going well, and you're supposed to go out with somebody on that Friday or Saturday night. You're getting ready. Everything's good. Y'all were supposed to meet at 7. 7 goes by, 8 goes by, 9 goes by, no call, you text, no response. You don't hear anything. You start going to the worst, right? Wow, something must have happened. You start worrying. But then midnight, nothing. And you might not even hear from that person until the next day or the following day. And then there's a reason. Some sort of reason that has been concocted, or some sort of angle that has been told to you that you have to either accept or reject. And for many people, when they get connected with somebody or they get emotionally involved with somebody, it can be very hard to step back and see that situation for what it is, as an alibi or whatever that looks like, that's not generally completely honest or truthful. And those are the times where you start questioning reality, because normally they'll have for you a reason, and the reason probably sounds pretty good. And usually the ghoster has waited to ghost you because they did not know what to tell you, because there was a situation that was happening. They were not prepared to tell you what happened, so they waited to come up with a better reason for what happened. And that can take time to come up with a good storyline. And so if you have been ghosted recently and the person came back with a really intricate story, that might be a red flag as well. I mean, some of these stories could be true. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. Again, this is not always or never, but it can happen. And these are the things that, when coupled together, this is just when all this is coupled together, this is the perfect storm that we need to be aware of. But when you're in a situation like that, especially when somebody puts you on the back burner for hours, doesn't call to check in with you like they normally do, doesn't show up for a date, doesn't show up for whatever, those are some red flags. especially when you are unable to get in touch with them. And I'm not talking about in the first 5-10 minutes, but if you're unable to get in touch with them during those few hours, there's definitely a red flag. There's definitely something there that needs to be addressed. And I think that many of you have gone through these situations and maybe taken somebody back multiple times when this has happened. It's happened 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And then you start questioning reality because there's always this good story. There's always a good reason why they weren't there, no matter how extreme that reason is. And so we have to step back sometimes and know, okay, some of those reasons could be true, but are they always true? And then on top of that, if that's the case, let's just say that they did get in trouble or something did happen. Why isn't it they don't call you? Why is it that you're not informed? Why is it that you're the last to know? Is it because they don't trust you? Is it because they go to somebody else? Or is it because the story itself really doesn't hold water? And those are the things that we need to analyze in life. Those are the things that we need to understand, because the longer we stay in a relationship where this is status quo, we begin to question our reality piece by piece on a day-to-day basis. And that questioning begins to take away from our self-esteem and our self-worth. And that's something that we have to consider, because each time we question ourselves, each time we create this pattern of questioning ourselves, and we create a situation where it is very hard to repair, and it's work that we have to do personally to get back our own identity. And this is important stuff, because anytime you've been in one of these relationships, you could be in a relationship with someone who is a pathological liar. You could be in a relationship with someone who is a raging narcissist. You could be in a relationship with someone that has all kinds of other tendencies or symptoms and signs, and you might not realize it. And the last thing we want to do is to basically saddle our life up with somebody that might not be able to be honest or hasn't had to be honest. Because remember, we have to be aware of these types of things. If somebody is very manipulative, they've learned this. They've come from this type of strategy. They've gotten there somehow. They've created this reality. It has worked for them throughout their life, or they had to use it to get what they wanted when they were a child. There's multiple reasons why this happens. So it's learned, and so you can't change that from somebody. If somebody is like this constantly across the board, you can't change that about somebody. Now, there is a difference when somebody is, and I'm not agreeing with lying at all, but if somebody is lying to self-preserve themselves and then able to eventually, be honest in that moment and talk about it, that's one thing. But I found that a lot of times when you're dealing with somebody that is lying to you, they're going to tell you half-truths. They're going to avoid the truth. There's multiple reasons why. And it's hard because you become this private investigator, and it can be really challenging because there's only so much that you can really know. There's only so much you can really know because really, honestly, the person has to be honest with you for you to have that transparency and to get it. And that's something that's hard because if you're not getting that from them, at some point in time, we have to figure out what are we willing to deal with and what are we not willing to deal with. How far are we willing to go with this, and what do we actually want in our life? And so stay tuned. When I return, I'm going to give you more, concepts, more red flags on things to really look at and how to really safeguard yourself and be kind to yourself in the process. Live your true life perspectives. With me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I am your host, Ashley Burgess. In today's show, I'm asking you, does someone's lies or omissions have you questioning your reality? And right before the break, I was talking about those situations that take place in relationships where something just doesn't add up. Something doesn't happen. Somebody doesn't show up where they're supposed to be. Somebody, ditches you, ghosts you, and then it leaves you wondering what's going on. What's the reason for it? And some people will ghost for a couple of days and come back around and have this elaborate story as to what happened or what went down or or, kind of blow it off. Well, I was in a bad mood, or I was depressed, or whatever that looks like, but that can really get you questioning. And I recently had a client that was telling me about a situation where they were supposed to meet a friend, and they got stood up, and then they kept calling and texting and were completely ghosted, and a couple of days went by, and eventually that person reached out and said, "Oh, I was depressed. Sorry, I didn't know how to handle it. I was really in a bad mood. I was in a bad place." And then it happened again and again. And so eventually you have to sit there and say, okay, is this really the truth? And maybe it is, but there's a concept of respecting other people and respecting other people's time, but also you really got to look past that and see what really is happening. Because at one time, okay, but multiple times in situations where they're unable to be contacted or communicated with can really set you off down a line wondering what is really happening and what's going on here and what's the reasoning behind this situation. Another red flag that I want to bring up, and this is something that many of you do not take into consideration, and that is the method of communication. The type of communication, actually, and the way that somebody communicates is very important. So, I've had it where you have somebody that texts you all the time, and then eventually the texts are like one-word text, or they go from texting you 100 times a day to twice a day, one word. Definitely a huge change. Or someone that instead of sending text messages that they're only sending photographs of things that they see, stuff like that. Or they change the type of communication. Let's say like we're getting calls from this person, and now the calls are non-existent, and now it's all text messages. And so that change in communication can be a very big sign that something is happening as well in this relationship that you need to be aware of. And it can be hard to see because we're in this world. There's so much technology. It's a fast-paced world. A lot of things are going on, and then people do have lives. So on the other flip side, people do have work. They do have lives. They do have stresses. They might not be able to text you immediately when you text. They might not text a long, robust text sometimes. But I'm not talking about that. I think we know a difference between that. When somebody might fluctuate a little bit because they're at work or they have family in town or that sort of thing. But I'm talking about when you see an abrupt change. And that can be definitely a sign of something is happening, something that you need to figure out or need to know. And it's a red flag when it's coupled with these other things. Okay, so don't take one in particular and run with it. Okay, this is what's happening in my life. I'm being lied to. This is horrible. No, I mean, people do have feelings. People do go through depression. People do have stress and anxiety. It's not that, but it's like coupled with these various different aspects are very important. The other indication I find interesting is that when you start going through this with somebody, you begin to question other aspects of the relationship. What is happening? How do they really feel? What is going on? You begin to question that, but you also begin to question yourself. And that's the part that can be inherently unhealthy. I'm not against questioning ourselves. I'm not against getting to the core of our issues. I'm certainly not against this. I'm about finding our truth. However, when we begin to question ourselves at the core, we begin to create more problems in our own life. We can question ourselves and our motives, but there's a point where we keep questioning ourselves. We might be dealing with somebody that we are being manipulated by and internalizing that type of manipulation. Because remember, sometimes when we're not getting answers to questions and somebody's manipulating you, sometimes it's easier to go inward and fight yourself than it is to ask the questions that you want to out of fear of what you might find out, or fear of the other person not being there for you and not being there or leaving or ghosting you or ending the relationship. Stay tuned. When I return, I'll be talking more about this, offering more information and red flags. Don't change the channel. Live your true life perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Does someone's lies have you questioning your own reality? Their lies, their omissions, their half-truths, whatever. Their ghosting, their non-appearances, their not being there, whatever it is, does it have you questioning your reality? And many of you actually are, because you're in a relationship, whether it's a best friend, whether it's an old friend from school, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, even a marriage. or a long-term romantic relationship. Many people are going through this right now. And so this is a very interesting dynamic, and I think that it has to be addressed and it needs to be talked about, because these are the questions you have. These are the things that you ask your best friend. Oh my God, what do you think about this? What do you think is happening there? What do you think? What do you think? And a lot of times your friends will be like, what are you doing? What is going on? Do you see the red flags? But it's so hard. It's so hard to see the red flags in your own life. It really is. And that's why, going to a life coach or seeking a therapist, either way is a very good thing, because the person doesn't, they don't know, they know the situation enough, but they don't have any preconceived, thought processes or any judgments. Also, there's no stake in the game to be able to provide you the knowledge and wisdom that you need to make that decision yourself. So right before the break, I was talking about how we begin to question other aspects of the relationship, questioning what they feel, what they think, other thoughts that they're having, based on the questioning they're having about the situation. Another thing that I want you to think about is, has the person recently closed off themselves? Has the person recently closed off? Like, have they become closed off around you? Is it someone that was open for a while, very open, maybe very honest with you, and all of a sudden this person seems to have closed down? They seem to not be that same emotional person they were, that same connection. It almost feels like there's a wall between you. There's a wall between you. Have you felt that way? Do you feel that way? And that's something that you really need to ask yourself, because, sometimes if you're in a long-term marriage, for example, and you've been married for a long time, you might not catch some of those signs because you're living under the same roof. You're sleeping next to somebody all the time, but they might not be being open with you. They might not be emotionally vulnerable with you. They might not be talking with you. And it's hard to see that because you're in close proximity, but you're really not emotionally close. And this is a big one. This is something that many people deal with, especially if they've been married for long term. But if somebody's recently closed off themselves, this is a big sign. If somebody's normally outwardly outspoken or talking about how they feel, and they're no longer talking about how they feel, this could be an issue. This could be something that you really have to think about. Because if somebody's recently closed themselves off, there's a sign there. There's something going on. There's something that they're processing. There's something that they're going through. There's something that they feel like they can't talk to you about it, or they're not ready to talk to you about it. And this can be hard for many of you, especially if you've been very close to your spouse. When you start catching this, a lot of you sweep it under the rug. You act like it doesn't exist. That's kind of human nature, right? Like, I don't really want to necessarily see this. I'm going to act like I didn't see anything or feel anything. Let's go out to dinner and have some drinks. It'll all go away. But this is a pattern that we need to be aware of. This is something that's very important. If you have been with somebody, though, for years where they have been closed off, and that's no different, that can be challenging in and of itself, because you don't really know where that person stands or what they feel, because they haven't really expressed any of that to you, which can also be an issue in and of itself, too. So these are very interesting situations that take place that can be very challenging all the way around. And that's something that I want us to think about. That's something that I want us to engage in. That's something that I want us to talk about, because that is a big sign, especially in a marriage, when somebody is closed off. But also, trying to open those lines of communication can be very helpful as well. So let's think about that. Any other things too, like before we go into solutions or options, because I think that when all of these are coupled together, when you look at that, when you're the questions, when you ask things and they're, it's kind of been minimalized or laughed at, or the subject has been changed, or that you're being told that you're overanalyzing, you're being told that you're wearing your feelings on your sleeve, or you're being told that you're being childish, or you're being told that type of thing. Situations that have taken place that don't feel right. Situations that have taken place that don't feel right. These are important things to think about. The communication method, has that changed? Has the consistency changed? And I'm talking about change for a while. I'm not talking about a day or two, but I'm talking about change for a while. Has somebody that would normally give you a dissertation every single text message is now giving you, a 1 or 2 word answer? Also, it's interesting too, I find that, when there is stuff going on, there's not a lot of questions being asked on the other side. They're not asking you how you're feeling. They're telling you what they're doing, and they're telling you what they're doing to a minimal amount. They're not opening themselves up. If you're used to somebody calling you at night and they don't call you anymore, that's also an interesting red flag, especially if it's gone for a period of time. Now, we're not talking about a few days here. You got to think about this because it's longevity. And I'm not trying to say, oh, everybody's up to something and we can't trust anybody. That is not what I'm talking about. But I am saying, coupled with all these things, we need to be aware, because the last thing I want you to do is to lose your identity, is to lose yourself in a situation because you don't know what the truth is anymore. So the first thing that I want you to do, if you find yourself in a situation kind of surrounded by these situations, surrounded by these red flags, I want you to begin to think about what are some of the questions that you really want to ask this person. And I don't want you to do it randomly. I don't want you to be on a phone call just randomly throwing out questions. I mean, you got to be really particular with the situation, especially depending on the depth of the relationship. You need to really look at that. If this is your husband or wife, you need to have a conversation, and it might be very unpleasant to you. But there has to be a conversation. You don't just text your husband or wife while they're at work. You don't just, get on a phone call and berate them. You got to be, face to face with them and have this conversation that will probably be extremely uncomfortable. But is knowledge uncomfortable? Is wondering uncomfortable? Is questioning your reality uncomfortable? Sure, it's miserable. So there's different layers to that. So I want you to think about those questions you have. What are some of the questions you have? And I don't want you to just put them in your head. I want you to write them down. I want you to write those down somewhere safe, somewhere that you can write it down, that you can feel okay about, that you feel fine that it's there. And I want you to analyze it and look at those questions multiple times and really think about it. Do I want to ask that question? Is this question pertinent? What are my most pertinent questions? The other question I have for you is, do you listen to your gut? Many of you do, many of you don't. And if you are somebody that listens to your gut and you've listened to it in the past and it's been honest with you in the past, what is your gut telling you now? Now, I don't like to just go gut check and say, hey, you go with your gut every time, because some of you haven't been priming your gut at all. You don't really know what's going on. And that's not a judgment call. It's just because you haven't really pushed yourself to analyze what's happening. And that's something that we got to see it. We got to see it for what it is. It's something that we have to see what it is. So it's if your gut is on all the time, and every time you go to your gut, you feel sorry. That's great. That's awesome. That's beautiful. If you haven't been using your gut and you're not doing that, you can't go by that. We have to, we really need the facts. And many of you might have been using your gut for a long time, but you still need the facts, right? It's still nice to have the facts to know I didn't make an assumption. I didn't judge somebody adversely. I did not, do X, Y, Z. I feel confident about whatever that was. And so we definitely want to, if we are listening to our gut, though, or we're feeling a certain way or certain thoughts are coming to our head, we need to write those down too. We need to be true to ourselves, because if we have been true to ourselves in the past, why aren't we doing that in this relationship as well? Because if the gut has been working all this time, then why isn't it working now? The other thing, too, is that we have to plan all this out, because the last thing you want to do is to do something out of your character that creates a reality that this person closes up or ghosts or dismisses you or is not going to give you the truth. We've got to plant the seed, and we've got to do it in the right place and the right time. So we have to get the right time to meet, and we also have to ask the right questions. And when we're asking the right questions, they have to be things that we really want to know. Like some of the superficial things we don't need to know. Some of the things, come on, pick your battles. Pick them. But we also need to ask very calmly and in a loving way. And some of you, it's very challenging because you've been holding on to these questions for a long time. It's been gnawing at you. You've been questioning your reality for a long time. You've been questioning yourself for a long time, and it's causing you to be angry and resentful. And so we have to really do a check at this point in time, because otherwise it's going to come out wrong. The person's going to feel as though they need to fight back, okay, and that's not a good thing. And if somebody really is honestly manipulating you and gaslighting you, and this isn't just straight self-preservation, we can get ourselves into a whole nother layer of manipulation and gaslighting, okay? And that can take you in a tailspin too. And so we have to be prepared for whatever. But in order to be prepared for whatever, we can't expect one thing or another. We have to go in with no expectations. You have to go in with no expectations. So we have to know those questions, and we have to know exactly what we want to ask. And that's one of the biggest things. I think that one thing too, before you go into these questions, if you have, somebody like myself, like a life coach to work with, it's a good person to discuss this, obviously, in weekly sessions with, so that you really know exactly the direction to go. You're prepared for it. We've talked about all possible scenarios. We understand the situation back and forth. If you don't have someone like that, I totally recommend you finding somebody like this, because it allows you to talk to somebody that's unbiased. Okay, because a lot of people that are in your life are biased, and they're biased because they want your time, or they're biased because they feel a certain way about you. You got to be careful when you're asking friends and family stuff. I mean, some people will really help you and do the best they can, but most people have some sort of bias. They have something that they want, or they have a way that they want, or they have a thought process of how they want your life to be, or they want to be in your life. And the best example I can give is somebody that's having marital trouble. And, the person that's having marital trouble is asking, a close friend that might have the desire to be in a relationship with them, asking them for advice. That's not going to go very well, because the person really wants a relationship with that person, even undercover. And what's going to happen is they're going to make decisions or offer suggestions that will get that person to leave that other person to some degree, based on whatever that looks like. And that's something that I really want us to look at, is to really realize, are we getting, really good advice, or are we getting biased advice? Because biased advice can get us into a whole nother world of problems. And I understand there's some friends that maybe you can talk to, but the best thing too is to really, when you are talking about this, is to try to make it faceless and nameless, so that people don't also judge it based on what they know about that person. And then you don't have to really worry about, if you do connect again, or if that person really wasn't lying, you don't have to worry about hiding that relationship from your friends or from your family and that sort of thing, because that can get into a whole nother can of worms, because then people can start judging that person and hating them, even if the person hasn't done anything, or making it very hard for you to spend time with this person because they have their own feelings and thoughts about that person, which leads to a whole nother slippery slope where you're over there hanging out with this person because everybody doesn't like this person anymore. And then that becomes another stress point in your life. And that's something you really want to think about. And lastly, but, one of the last thoughts that I want to bring up to you is that, if we're going to ask somebody their opinion, you need to make sure that they're trustworthy, and you need to listen to what they have to say, but you also have to go with your gut ultimately, because no matter what happens, if you don't do what you need to do, that's only going to take you off target. And you have to kind of listen to yourself and decide. And I've also found too that sometimes meditation on it, stepping back, analyzing the situation for what it is, being able to see things clearer. And it takes time. You don't want to go at it the moment that this all comes to pass. Is not always the time that this needs to be executed. Now, sometimes it's harder to go back retro. It's harder to go back to the past and say, hey, well, remember what happened 6 months ago? We don't want to wait 6 months. We don't even want to wait 1 month. When something happens, you might not want to attack it that moment because you're not prepared to be calm and to ask the proper questions. But, I'm talking about, let's attack this in a few days. Let's prepare to decide what we need to talk about and get prepared to have that conversation so that it's still fresh. Because remember, your brain will start playing tricks with you. Our brain will start finding reasons why it's not that big of a deal. Our brain will start creating the reality that really didn't happen. Our brain will start creating the reality that, oh, well, that wasn't, oh, yeah, I thought that was kind of that way, but they, they've been having a hard time, and, I understand, they ghosted me, and I didn't hear from them, but it's okay, because, I know that they've been having challenges in their life, and that's fine. I'm glad that you have empathy, but at the same time, is that the right place for empathy? Is that the right place for that support? Or is this something that's been ongoing that you keep giving a pass to, that's taking away from your self-esteem and your self-worth? Because the more and more we give in to not very good behavior, the more and more that we begin to question our reality, and the more and more that we fall away from where we need to be in our life with our goals and our desires and our beliefs and our values. Stay tuned. When I return, I'm going to be giving you more tips and tricks and some things to think about here, because if you've been in this position, you know the pain and suffering and the stress that comes with it, and nobody wants to feel that. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Does someone's lies have you questioning your reality? Does somebody's omissions have you questioning your reality? Somebody's actions have you questioning your reality? And that can happen across the board. And I've met with many clients that have talked about that. You know, somebody has ghosted them for a period of days, and it makes them question, and they come back with the story of what happened, or the communication is completely changed, or when they ask questions, they're, mocked or it's belittled or what have you. And so, before the break, I was giving you ways of going around this and asking those questions, thinking about those questions, creating a list, and ultimately the best situation you can have. And I think for most people, these situations exist with people that are close to them, family members, close, super close friends, or romantic relationships or marriages. So you have the chance in those relationships to be face to face. And ultimately, to ask these questions, you really do need to be face to face. I've had clients that can't stop. They got to ask on the phone, and I say, we're not going to get what we want. We might not get what we want face to face, person to person, but at least we can see their body language. At least we can see their avoidance, or we can see this, or we can see this type of behavior. Can't see that on the phone. And for some of you, you do need the information, you need the evidence, because you already have that gut feeling. Maybe you already have that gut that you already know something's going on. You just don't know exactly what it is or what's happening. So you're needing to have some of those answers filled in, and that's important. But we need to know what we want to ask, and we need to ask it diligently and calmly if we want to have particularly the right responses. And this is important, because we owe it to ourselves to get those answers, and we have to get it. And it's not manipulative by being calm. You're just by holding yourself back a little bit emotionally, we're also able to listen to the response. Very powerful stuff. And that's something that I really want us to think about and really connect with, because, if we have relationships in our life that is causing us, sadness or grief or fear or depression, we really need to look at that, because that's taking you off target from where you need to be focusing your energy. If somebody's constantly ghosting you and you're in love with them, that's really a painful place to be. And they keep coming back with this idea or this answer of what happened, and you keep buying into it, but you keep getting hurt. Remember, actions speak louder than words. I might tell you I care. I might tell you I love you. But if I'm not walking the walk, I can talk all I want. And that's another last piece that I want to leave with you today in today's radio show / podcast, is I want you to think about that. When somebody tells you that, are they also doing the actions? Are they walking the walk? And I really need you to look at that, because our society today is so into words. Does that person step up to the plate? Is that person there for you? Are they there for you? Do they actually show you that they care, or do they tell you they care? Do they tell you they're sorry, or do they show you that they're sad about their actions? I need you to look at that, because that is going to be the telltale sign. Because a lot of times we've allowed words to take over our society, not actions. Actions are strong. If somebody says, I really care about you and I want you to be safe, if you're not hearing from them, like they say they're going to call you and check on you, and they don't do it, and then they don't do it again, and they don't do it again, that's actions speak louder than words. I'm telling you this in the moment, but I'm not feeling that. And so ultimately, if that's happening in your life, you need to bring that up to that person. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Give them the option to make changes. Give them the option to show. Give them the option, and maybe they just, lost their way, or maybe, they had a lot of things on their mind, but giving them the option to make that change. But if you give them that option and you bring it up and they consistently do it, that's an answer all on its own too that we don't like to normally take, because that answer stings. That's not what we want to hear. If they're walking the walk, great. If they're not, bring it up. If they still don't walk the walk, great. Bring it back up. If they still don't, now you got to decide what you're going to do. Because we've been shown the evidence of what they are going to do and apparently what they're not going to do. I hope this show has been beneficial. Please share it with your family, friends, coworkers, anybody out there that you think, wants to live their true life and really get to that level and understanding the human condition and why people do what they do, and also being able to understand the ins and outs and the psychological ins and outs of things to really help them to really live their true life, to get some of these questions out of their mind and be able to have those solid answers and to be, true to themselves. Also, check out the YouTube channel. Go to Ashley Burgess, Berges, Ashley Berges. New video content out every single week. Check it out. Let me know if you have any ideas or thoughts. Definitely reach out. You can go to ashleyburgess.com and click on that contact page. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.